sun, moon, stars, earth, sky, oceans. Long ago, the humans and elves lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Dark Mages attacked. Only Thunder, King of the Dragons, could stop all-out war. But last winter, he was killed. A year has passed, and my stepbrother and I found his only egg the world had thought being destroyed, the Dragon Prince. And though he is only small, I believe returning him to the elves could save the world.
The Dragon Prince is the brainchild of Aaron Ahaz, who you will know better as the mind behind some of Avatar's greatest writing. Now, Mike and Brian were responsible for a lot, but Aaron was one of the head writers, and he's responsible for moments like in Crossroads of Destiny, Bitter Work, and The Storm, that bring a certain unique nuance to the series that Avatar is so well known for. While his wife Elizabeth wrote episodes like Zuko Alone and The Southern Raiders, renowned as two of the best episodes in the entire series. So, how did things turn out with him as creator and world builder as well? If you are only here to find out whether or not I recommend it, then skip to this moment in the video. So the first thing that I noticed about the series was its similarities to Avatar: The Last Airbender, which, to be clear, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It also shares a number of similarities to stories like Hamlet. But it is curious to note that it has this world with 6 primordial sources of magic, they call it, and that the world is divided into kingdoms of each type of magic. It's clearly reminiscent of the 4 nations and the elements. This is compounded by the fact that the first season is called Book 1 Moon, and I can't help but point out that the moon played a pretty crucial role in the first season of Avatar. But this didn't bother me. A story can be plenty unique enough in its characters and its conflicts and its themes, even if it shares a similar starting premise with some other stories. There are also a couple of other similarities, like that Sokka is the voice actor for the main character, which I didn't realize until I watched it, so when I heard it, it just brought these feelings of nostalgia rushing back just by virtue of hearing Sokka, Callum, speak again. And also that the main character mostly uses air magic. Aspiro! But before we get to some of the criticisms of the show, the absolute strength of the Dragon Prince is in its characters. I was actually taken aback with how well defined Rayla, Callum, Ezrin, Claudia, and Soren were right from the beginning, right from the very first episode. And part of the reason that this was that they worked so well is that Aaron made sure to give them all distinct character moments within their first episode. Think about how we meet Hermione in her very first scene in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She goes, "Are you sure that's a real spell? Well, it's not very good, is it? I've only tried a couple of spells myself, but they've all worked for me." Just a spot-on Hermione impression. But the point is that we essentially get a summary of her entire character in that line. But what's critical is that nobody else could have said it. It's a Hermione-type line. This makes the character themselves more memorable, because if all of their lines could essentially be said by anyone, then they aren't very well defined. Now in The Dragon Prince, the best example of one of these distinct character moments is from definitely who I feel is the best written character in the entire series, Rayla. Aaron has this startling bit of imagery of her running through the trees after a scout in the rain at night. She's tasked with killing him, but when she tracks him down and puts a knife to his throat, she can't bring herself to do it. Now, she never says a word in this scene, but it really sums up her character. She's a badass, but she has this moral conflict within her. She wants to live up to the expectations of those around her, to be the assassin that she's trained to be, but she can't bring herself to do her duty and kill someone. Likewise, Callum's first scene is him failing to learn a sword, but when someone mentions art, he gets excited. He's going, "Art! Finally something I'm good at." We get this kind of sense that he's this prince who feels that he's really inadequate. He can't be the prince that everyone expects him to be. And the things that he is good at, art, aren't really valued in any way. And one of Claudia's first moments is her walking around reading a book, incredibly engrossed, which, by the way, it's Love Amongst the Dragons, a reference to the Ember Island players in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and she's so caught up in reading this that she nearly walks into a tree. We know from this moment that she's a nerd and she loves learning, and she's a bookworm who has her head up in the clouds. Each of these scenes clearly lay out an archetype that all of them fit into, so we kind of have a good idea of who they are, but what's important is that they did actually build on them for the most part. Aaron didn't just let these characters become static, defined by single lines, unable to develop. They're amazing, and they alone were actually enough to keep me motivated watching the show. So Lord Viren, this kind of human dark mage, seems to be the antagonist of the series so far. They did do something interesting with him, which is that when they first introduced him in the context of a genuine relationship of love and care with the king. It seemed like a brotherly, friendly relationship. It's only later on that he really started acting like this textbook evil mage dude who looked like Alex Pettifer from Beastly. Just a classic of a film. Truly recommend you watch it. Now to rave a little bit about Rayla, her artistic design is really unique, her Scottish accent fits so well, she is fantastically voice acted, and she was really humanized and relatable. She actually avoided the fallacy of badass female character equaling strong female character. She had vulnerabilities, which I really liked. She had fears and worries and personal doubts, and I felt, at least across the series, her transition from antagonistic towards the princes to begrudgingly traveling with them to accepting them and becoming their friends was quite clear. And there was something else unexpected. She's funny. She is the funniest character in the whole series. There's this one episode where we learn that she's terrified of water. So when they lose the boat by accident, she goes, "Oh no, our boat is drifting away, slipped just out of my reach. What will we do now?" Now, while there are big ups for all of the characters, there was a little bit of inconsistent characterization across the series when it came to Claudia and Soren in particular. So they're not really antagonists yet. They've been told to hunt down the princes, but they haven't actually come into conflict just yet. We'll probably see more of that next season. But the opening scene for Callum features him training with Soren, who seems to have taken on a big brother role of sorts. They seem to really like one another. He's clearly loyal to Katalis, and he fights to defend Ezran's father, the king. There's nothing in any of these scenes to suggest that he doesn't actually really like Callum, that he's just pretending to, which made it a little bit jarring when he started making fun of Callum behind his back. And not just in a teasing way, but kind of in a mean way. Callum and Claudia are also really close. They seem to have a history and they get along really well. She wants to protect him in the first episode. And yet Soren calls him names, and when he does, Claudia isn't like, "Hey, that's our friend," and we had whole scenes establishing that we had a really good rapport with one another. Now, she doesn't find the joke funny, but it's not because it was mean to their friend, but because the joke itself wasn't a good joke. And there are a few moments where this sort of thing happens. Now, it's not unheard of course, friends to make fun of one another behind their backs, but this to me didn't really feel like kind of just casual teasing. It felt like they were putting in this scene to make Claudia and Soren appear more like antagonists, as bad people. Like Soren had been pretending to like Callum, which to me cheapens the moral conflict of the story. Because on the one hand, Soren talks about how he wants to make his dad, Viren, happy, but he also doesn't feel he can do what's been asked of him, to kill the princes, people he's always considered friends. So this just seemed a little bit inconsistent with that. And this is the same with Claudia. I think spending more time in their scenes focusing on the inner conflict they have around what their father has asked of them would be a more effective way of developing that relationship between the two as siblings, as well as a more emotionally moving way to develop their dynamic with the princes. This thing with inconsistent characterization was sort of also the case with the king, Ezran's father, because in his final scene, Viren came to him, and he was like, "You belong on your knees, you are a servant to me, and a servant to the kingdom." And it was kind of inconsistent with his manners in the scenes previously. He was always quite soft-spoken, he was always quite understanding. And it wasn't just the usual sentiment of him saying, "I don't like dark magic." It was kind of the cruel way in which he did it, to someone who, by all indications, he had considered a friend in the scenes before. And he almost overtly said, "I don't consider you a friend," which was a little bit strange. But when it comes to characters like these, I tend to assume that where things don't quite make sense, there's a lot more to know. And there were some lines in the show to suggest that there's a lot more backstory between them for us to explore. Now, in terms of minor characters, Amaya, the prince's aunt, was an absolute delight. She is deaf and only communicates through sign language with help of her assistant, Captain Gren, but her character is so much more than that. Part of the reason I liked her is that her deafness is a feature of her character, but not the reason for it. She's also skeptical of those in power, an incredibly good fighter, a great leader. Also, she had Gren. Gren's cool, I just like Gren. But let's discuss the story. The story is, for the most part, very simple. Ankhtar and Sokka have to get to the Northern Water Tribe to learn waterbending, and Rayla, Callum and Ezran have to get the Dragon Egg to the Elves to stop the war. The simple journey story structure means that the focus of the narrative can be on developing characters, rather than on unraveling any grand overarching plot or mystery. So with each new location or episode, a character is typically delved into a little deeper, their beliefs are confronted, or they change as a person, and the viewer still knows that with every episode they're getting closer to their goal. And the Dragon Prince succeeds in the setup for the most part, but it wasn't as strong as it could have been. One of the better episodes of the season is where we learn that Rayla has a fear of water, and she has to overcome that fear in order to save the day at the end of the episode. They also introduce a nice nuance to her character. She's ashamed of her parents. She calls them cowards because they fled when they were needed most. My bet is that there will be a deeper backstory to that to be explored in later seasons, but I'm really interested in seeing where that relationship goes. And there are other good character moments, like where Callum finally learns to trust Rayla with the Dragon Egg. There's a lot of kind of character interaction and trusting one another, and tension going on in that scene, so it was quite nice. But then there are some episodes which don't really feel like they develop any of the major characters or any of the major themes. In episode 7, Rayla tries to get a Sunfire Elf knife in order to cut off the wristband that has been a major dramatic thread throughout the season. Now to get it, she has to take it off a man who clearly hates elves, and this was a prime opportunity for them to explore the prejudices that war creates and the long, deep-seated resentment of humans towards elves and elves towards humans. But they didn't. It could have been a really moving moment for Rayla to try to get this knife off this human, for him to refuse, and only after he changes his mind about elves to hand it over. But instead there were no real changes or revelations about any of the characters or deepening of the themes. It was just a problem that needed to be solved, and then they did. I think that this episode will cause a great divide between the fans. Get it? Oh no, the joke was clear. But I do want to talk about the beginning. It has a very Shakespearean, Hamlet-esque setup. The king is murdered, and the uncle-esque type character wants to step up into the throne. The princes are out in the wilderness, and he wants to make sure that they never return. The princes must mature and return to the throne triumphant. Or be killed if they really want to follow Hamlet. The first few episodes are really tense. The king knows that the elves are coming to kill him, Rayla is trying to prove her worth to herself and her mentor, and it's got a number of action scenes that are really cool to watch. There's moral nuance with how Runan admonishes Rayla for saving that one human, but dooming all of her friends. Rayla is forced to confront him later on when she sees the Dragon Egg survived, but he still won't listen. The cycles of vengeance and war are ever turning. They're too deeply ingrained for these people to escape. Humans describe elves as monsters, and the elves describe humans as barbarians. These are big themes for the series to tackle and introduce so early on, and I felt they did it well for the start of the series. It kept me really wanting to know what would happen next. Now, while I did love the beginning, I'm not so sure how I felt about the ending. The strength of the Dragon Prince lies in its setup. It has great characters, a simplistic story that allows for character development, an interesting world and lore, and an explorable dynamic between the protagonists and antagonists being set against one another, but not really wanting to fight. But the ending caught me off guard, and I'm not so sure that it's in a good way. The tension for most of the season is derived from 3 dramatic threads. 1, that Varen wanted to kill the princes and capture the egg. 2, that Amaya and her soldiers were trying to kill Rayla and bring the princes home. And 3, that Rayla failed in her duty to kill Ezran and was slowly losing her hand as the honor band tightened. So with this setup, I was naturally expecting that the ending of the series would either come from their first face down against Claudia and Soren, or they would have to avoid Amaya's soldiers, or they would be searching for another way for Rayla to get rid of her armband. Which meant that when we found out that the egg was dying and that they had to save it, it felt like that we were the main characters in Skyrim who are just being dragged off to do some random side quest for a villager, while the main quest is just waiting over there. And it didn't really help that I never really believed that the egg would die, and then when he hatches, Asmodeus just tears off the armband. I mean, alright then. I think we knew that dragons were incredibly powerful in this world. They are definitely portrayed to be that way. But we're never given any sort of exact scope of their powers or their abilities, where they come from or what we can expect of them, which means that this kinda felt like a Deus Ex Machina resolution to one of the major dramatic threads in the story. Callum, Ezrin, and Rayla never knew that the dragon would be able to tear the armband off, meaning that it doesn't function as payoff for their efforts to make sure the dragon hatches. But that being said, the climactic scene was very nicely animated and looked beautiful. It had the storm forming around them, then the eye of the storm, lightning zapping everywhere, and the egg hatching. It did look pretty cool. And then there's this creature, whatever it is. I think it's like referred to as bird in the subtitles. It's not a bird. Now, while the Dragon Prince looked really lovely on the whole, one of its major criticisms that I've heard a lot, and I do partly agree with, is the animation style. It can be grating for some people. It wasn't personally for me because I don't tend to focus that much on the animation style more than I do on the dialogue or the characters. That's where I tend to get my enjoyment for a story. But I do distinctly remember in one of the earlier episodes, I think it was Ezrin was like lowering his head and crying, and it wasn't much movement. It took place over like a quite a bit of time, and there were only like 4 frames that it flicked between, so you distinctly saw him go, and I was like, ooh. So yes, that is definitely something to consider if you're thinking of watching it. If that really doesn't sit well with you, then maybe this isn't the thing. But it's also key to keep in mind that this might be a budget thing and they'll be able to create smoother transitions and animations in the future. So what are my final thoughts? If there was one word to describe the Dragon Prince, it would be potential. It has all the ingredients of a fantastic, mature show, even if it's aimed at a younger generation. It has fantastic characters and moral conflicts that will be really interesting to explore on a deeper level in the future. All they need to do is fully seize that opportunity, even if they didn't quite do so this season. I can't wait for season 2. This was only 9 episodes, and I think it's only the first step in a huge journey and story that Aaron Ahaz wants to tell about Callum, Ezra, and Rayla. So do I recommend watching it? Yes. Unequivocally, yes. Not because it has the overall narrative cohesion that we saw in Avatar: The Last Airbender, or because it's absolutely perfect in every possible way, but because I think it has such incredible potential, and a great setup, great characters, kind of really nice music as well. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on the series down in the comments below. I want to know, what was your favourite moment in the whole series? Who was your favourite character? What's the biggest criticism you have of the series yourself? Do you agree with my analysis? Let me know down below. In the meantime, come follow me over on Twitter and Facebook. Email me stuff that you've made, the address and links in the description below. If you like this sort of content, if you would like to see more Dragon Prince, tell me. Tell me over on Twitter, tell me down in the comments if you want to see more of this. I need to know, because otherwise I probably won't. If you really like my channel, then come support me over on Patreon for just a couple of dollars a month. We're going to be doing a Lord of the Rings viewing thing like tomorrow or the day after that, so be in quick if you want to join us watching Fellowship of the Ring Extended Edition. Stay nerdy, stuff your ears, and I will see you in the future.